Yeah, so the third one is coming from a region in France called Alsace, which is on the eastern border with Germany. And it's a really fascinating region from a historical standpoint because at certain points of its history, it was part of France, other points it was part of Germany, and it's kind of flip-flop back and forth. And as a result, it's developed a very unique kind of subculture that's not quite French and it's not quite German. Okay. It is Alsace. And it's a breadbasket of really delicious foods and wines, some of the best.
Yep.
Sheesh.
We'll just hang on one sec. All right.
Okay, we good?
Yeah.
Let's give it a shot. Okay,
let's give it a shot.
So going back to Alsace, it's a really amazing place from a food and culture standpoint because of this interesting history. Like it sounds weird, but one of my favorite period jam on the planet is made in Alsace, like jelly jam. You know.
Oh, okay.
And the food is really interesting because it's a lot of like cured stuff, but also. Again, the big German influence, but French influence. It's very strange, but it's a really cool, beautiful place that sits along the Vosges mountain range, and all the vineyards are planted on the slopes of the Vosges, and they get really high levels of ripeness there because they are protected from the weather. And the wines, as a result, become very, very complex. But it's a tough spot from a consumer standpoint because sometimes the wines have a little bit of residual sugar and sometimes they don't. So, sugar's not very in vogue these days. And I understand why, it can be frustrating to not know what exactly the wine style is going to be. And that's why it's important to develop a relationship with your local wine shop. But when you get the wine that falls within your style, they are just immensely complex. You could write a tasting note on these wines that's, a mile long because they just can hang on the vine and develop so many flavors for so long. So this is Marcel Dice. It is 2016 Grasberg, which is a really cool site that sits above one of the most famous sites in the whole region called Altenberg de Bergheim. And it's a co-fermented field blend. So meaning that it's mainly 3 different varieties, Riesling, Gewürztraminer, and Pinot Gris, that are all grown together and then harvested together and fermented together. And he's a big proponent of biodynamic farming and also the field blends, which is the traditional style from this region. And it does have a little bit of residual sugar, what we will refer from here on out as RS, just to save ourselves some words. And that's a common wine term, RS, residual sugar. But it's not at a level that is cloying. There's still lots of acidity and freshness in this. It's just giving it a little bit of weight. But it also gives it a lot of flexibility in terms of food and wine pairing, because if you have a little bit of spice in your dish, a little bit of residual sugar goes a long way to taming that spice. And so like the classic combination would be, Prädikat, German Riesling, meaning, Spätlese or something like that with like Thai food, right? Or something along those lines. So this can work with that same concept, but at a lower residual sugar rate, and is therefore, I think, more flexible because you don't have as much sugar to contend with, right? So if you're talking about, in this case, bulgogi, okay, like you do the flank and ribs with bulgogi marinade, or that's how I do them at home anyways. You do it here with something else, I think. Slightly sweet, but also slightly spicy, that marinade, right? And so that I think would be perfect with this. This is something where you could take that pork belly that we were talking about earlier and add some zhuzh to it, spice it up, this would really work.
Yeah, tons going on in this.
Yeah,
it's like so many different avenues that you can go. I mean, like really dry cheese, or even a funky cheese. Like there's dry hams, all kinds of different things that can, right? You can pick it up on some smoke here.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is this kind of smokiness to it. There's, with these co-fermented wines, what happens is these varieties will all have slightly different vegetative cycles, meaning they will ripen at different rates. And so when you harvest them together, which is not always the case, sometimes they'll go through and they'll pick one variety and then through another. But in the traditional sense of field blends, they will go through and pick everything at once. So that means some things are slightly underripe, some things are slightly overripe, and some things are perfectly ripe in the middle. So they all kind of balance out in the wash generally, and the underripe stuff adds more acid, so it compensates for the overripe stuff. But you get all this huge array of flavors because you get underripe flavors, overripe flavors, and just ripe flavors all together. And then the longer the wine kind of melds in the fermenter and in the bottle together, like this is 16, right? 2016, so it's had some time in bottle. The more complex it gets because all those things become more cohesive. And so again, you're right, tasting now a mile long on this thing. It's just so
much going on.
So much going on, and it's so delicious. And that little bit of RS is just adding weight in the mid palate and just a hint of sweetness on the finish. But if you had something that was slightly spicy, and I'm not talking real spicy here, like very mildly spicy, you wouldn't even think about that residual sugar, right? And we're only talking about tiny amounts here. This is probably, our threshold generally is about 4 grams per liter, okay? What does a gram look like? A gram looks like a quarter teaspoon. So you're talking about in a liter of liquid. If 4 grams is our threshold, you're looking at 1 teaspoon of sugar, what would look like granulated sugar, in an entire liter. We're not talking about big calorie counts here, okay? And I think that that's something that you as wine drinkers and lovers listening to this need to realize is that a little bit of residual sugar is not going to kill you. It's not a bad thing. It's actually playing a very important role here. And to give you some context, Coca-Cola has about 120 grams per liter. Okay. So if we're looking at, say, because we're tasting this and our threshold is 4, let's say it's at 10 grams per liter, right? We're looking at less than 10% of what a glass of Coca-Cola has.